For considerable period, our understanding of North Korea has been limited by terminologies such as nuclear dictatorship and log state. In the second season of Now in North Korea, our aim is to provide a comprehensive and nuanced perspective of the country. As part of this effort, we have produced the second clip of New North Korea. Changes at the dining table, the silence of the port, and vanishing forests. These three spaces serve as mirrors reflecting North Korean society today. More subtle than systemic change though, clues to daily life can be found within these three spaces. Under the well-known political and ideological environment, the daily lives of North Koreans are undergoing significant changes. The socialist-style communal dining table is now being transformed into a gourmet culture that values individuals' taste and enjoyment. Dr. Maria Osetrova, research fellow at the Russian Academy of Sciences, states, North Korean cuisine is not merely a food culture. It is a tool of diplomacy which contributes to the nation's image. The concept of Korean cuisine plays a significant role in shaping North Korea's national identity and represents a crucial aspect of the country's efforts to establish relations with the global community. While North Korea seeks to establish global connection through its cuisine, other indicators clearly demonstrate that the country remains detached from the international trade system. It is important to note that North Korea's access to the sea is becoming increasingly restricted. Dr. César Ducruet, research fellow at French National Center for Scientific Research, has analyzed the trends in North Korea's maritime network using data from the past several decades. The port of Najin and Cheongjin, which were once major hubs of Northeast Asian logistics, have now become a symbol of isolation and decay. The analysis indicates a shift in North Korea's foreign strategy, with trade routes shifting from sea to land, particularly towards the Chinese border. The last researcher is focusing on North Korea's forest. Dr. Joshua Powell, the University College of London, has documented how North Korea's forests have been deteriorated since the arduous March period and how its ecosystems are collapsing under the logic of politics and ecological survival. In the middle of food shortages, there has been an increase in logging and poaching, with a view to the international wildlife trade. These processes are indicative of North Korean people's desperate struggle for survival, and ultimately, they have resulted in transformation of its ecosystem into empty forest. These three scholars focus more on the life than with the political system. The most effective approach to understanding North Korea may involve examining the experiences of people living there, as opposed to focusing solely on the headlines in the news.
Okay, today we invited Dr. Joshua Elves-Powell of University College of London. He is a very young but very distinguished scholar on this North Korea's political and economic conditions impact on terrestrial biodiversity. Biodiversity really matters, in 2025. We are excited to have you, Joshua Powell, Dr. Joshua Elves-Powell. All right, the floor is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name's Dr. Joshua Elves-Powell, and I'm a conservation biologist and an associate lecturer at UCL in biodiversity conservation and ecology. And I'm going to discuss an often overlooked aspect of North Korea, the country's terrestrial biodiversity, and new research which indicates how it might be impacted by the country's political and economic conditions. A good question to start with might be why North Korea and why North Korean biodiversity? And obviously the vast majority of research on North Korea is very understandably focused on human systems, including the North Korean economy, the military, the functioning of the North Korean government, and human rights in the country. And in light of the importance of those issues, biodiversity and the wider environment of North Korea is often overlooked. But it has important implications for the country's human population and for regional and global ecology. And the reason for that is that the Korean Peninsula, in fact, occupies an important site for, as I say, regional and global biodiversity. So in the early 20th century, it was part of the second most diverse region of the world for large carnivores. It's a highly mountainous landscape with large areas unsuitable for agriculture and industry. And the advantage of this is that it provides a mosaic of habitat refuges suitable for a wide diversity of wild animals and plants. It also provides important sites for migratory birds on the East Asia-Australasia flyway. And just looking at a map here of the Korean Peninsula, it's obvious that North Korea is key to the maintenance of a corridor between the Korean Peninsula and meta-populations of terrestrial species in mainland Asia, particularly in China and Russia, and those species which can't fly or perhaps swim between those countries and, say, South Korea. And in recent years, there's been a recovery of a number of these important mammal populations in northeast China, along the regions bordering North Korea. But the status of many of these species in North Korea is poorly known. It's currently impossible to conduct reliable, direct scientific field surveys in the country. And even when these have been possible, they've faced major restrictions. For example, there was a 1998 survey for Amur tigers by the Institute of Geography for the DPRK Academy of Science, which was conducted in partnership with Russian scientists. And although in recent years opportunistic surveys have been conducted, for example, for birds, this is a particular issue for mammals. Mammals are often elusive, cryptic, and nocturnal. So opportunistic surveys are usually unsuitable. And furthermore, these surveys have provided little information on socio-ecological systems in North Korea. That is how biodiversity relates to the people of North Korea. But there are several alternative options that we can employ. One that we look to implement is a local ecological knowledge-based approach. Now, LEK is a type of ecological data that's based on the knowledge of local communities about their environment and the wildlife they share it with. It's traditionally applied with current residents. For example, in the photograph on screen at the moment in Kyrgyzstan, it might be applied with local community members here to establish sightings or perceptions of, say, snow leopards. But this is impossible in the context of North Korea. So instead, it would be applied with former residents, that is, North Korean defectors or escapees in South Korea and in the UK. And this draws on and will be familiar in the context of studies which have used interviews with North Korean defectors to elicit information about human systems in North Korea. But as a natural scientist, that involves a number of adjustments to our way of thinking about this form of ecological data. First, it involves adjusting our understanding of who are the experts, who are the specialists. And that's not restricted to individuals with formal scientific training in zoology or botany, but perhaps, say, a hunter or a soldier who's had the opportunity to spend considerable periods of time in relatively remote regions of North Korea. Tied to this, it's really important to seek to understand different understandings of and names for species. So in the context of North Korea, we can't assume that the local common name, what someone might call an animal, is the same as that is used in South Korea. And this was certainly the case for a species that I will discuss later, the sable, or to give it its scientific name, Martes sibyllina. And finally, there are limited opportunities to verify the reported data, but these are not entirely absent. So, for example, we were able to verify reported changes to North Korean forests against satellite-based remote sensing, which might give us additional confidence in our data. So what I wanted to do is take a look at a few of the key findings from our work. The first concerning the degradation of North Korea's forests and the potential political and economic drivers for this. So first, to provide some broad context, forests are an important part of the Korean ecosystem and support a wide diversity of terrestrial species. So in South Korea, considerable progress has been made on restoring forest cover that's been lost through historical demand for timber and firewood and extensive damage during the Korean War. thanks to major reforestation efforts in the 20th century. So the photograph on screen at the moment of a forested mountain slope, although this is secondary forest, the restoration of this habitat represents a significant conservation gain right across South Korea. Unfortunately, in North Korea, by contrast, reforestation programs have generally struggled from poor or incomplete implementation. So our findings published last year in Regional Environmental Change indicate an important shift in North Korean forests that corresponds to the period in the 1990s referred to as the Arduous March, a period when the collapse of the North Korean economy and the public distribution system and the onset of a major famine brought about severe human hardship. So what the figure on the left shows is a wave of deforestation moved northwards during this time period, indicated by a decline in vegetation cover, so registering in orange, into the northern provinces. While in the south and west of North Korea, areas which had historically been more heavily cleared saw cropland expansion, and that's indicated by the bright green colours. And while the North Korean economy has since recovered, the overall picture is of continued decline in total forest cover, marked by the solid line on the graph on the right-hand side. The second important theme from our findings is the exploitation of wild animal and plant populations. And a key theme here is that periods of severe hardship and shortages of food and basic goods for ordinary citizens in North Korea have underpinned their interactions with wildlife. The consumptive use and trade of mammal-derived products is widespread, both legal, though often poorly regulated, but also illegal. And this was found to encompass almost all native mammal species over 500 grams in body mass. Since the 1990s, there's been a growth of an informal market in wildlife products, and this has emerged in response to the country's economic and food crises, because, of course, ordinary residents could no longer rely on the state to meet their basic needs for survival. And of course, wild animals and plants may serve as a valuable source of food, and that includes luxury foods, a source of clothing, fur specifically, for winter clothing, or for use in traditional Korean medicine. And this corresponds very closely to the rise of North Korea's second economy. And lots of the patterns that you see here are in line with informal trade in other goods. But another important aspect from this time period was the establishment of cross-border trade with buyers in China. So cross-border trade to China, once established, it appears to have continued despite, again, improved economic conditions in North Korea. And this now seems to be a major driver behind exploitation of wild animals and plants in North Korea. And this involves a really wide diversity of species and products, just some of which are provided here. So that includes subsistence and medicinal uses, some of which will be familiar in the context of South Korea, and others will be unfamiliar to most listeners, as well as skin trade in a very wide range of fur-bearing species. And this has consequences, quite serious consequences for exploited species. For example, one carnivoran that was previously present in North Korea, but is highly valued for fur trade was the sable, photographed. And our findings suggest that if sable is still present in North Korea at all, it's now extremely rare. It was spoken of almost like a mythical animal by hunters that we interviewed. Our findings also indicated the importance of wildlife as a natural resource for the North Korean state, both to supply raw materials, for example, skins, as I say, for the manufacture of winter clothing, but also to generate foreign currency, specifically through trade with buyers from North Korea's main economic partner, the People's Republic of China. And it's important to note that some of this trade is legal, but other elements of trade are illegal and constitute, in some cases, wildlife trade as state crime. Either they're in violation of UN Security Council sanctions, they're in CITES Appendix 1 listed species, which are highly protected, with parties to CITES, specifically China, or involve the North Korean state being linked to trade in species that are protected under North Korean law itself. And this has broad ecological consequences for the whole Korean peninsula. There are clearly unequal pressures on key ecosystems across the peninsula, and this varies by geography, ecosystem, and taxon, and perhaps we'll get onto this a little bit more in the questions. But if we were just to look at one specific group, so terrestrial large carnivores, species like big cats and bears, North Korea does have some suitable habitat remaining. It has a comparatively low human population density compared to South Korea. And there is clearly the potential for recolonization from China and Russia. As I mentioned at the start, big cats in particular have been recovering in northeast China over the past 2 decades in areas very close to the border with North Korea. However, inside North Korea itself, the quality of habitat has slightly deteriorated since the 1990s, and the availability of large-bodied prey is extremely mixed. So a number of key deer populations seem to be heavily depleted, although wild boar populations, for example, seem relatively healthy. Furthermore, this also has an impact on South Korea directly, particularly South Korea's aspirations for natural recolonization by endangered species. And one example would be discussions around whether the Amur leopard could ever return to South Korea. It was only lost from South Korea in 1970, so relatively recently. But this is highly unlikely, while human threats in North Korea remain severe. So some key takeaways here. Although it does have certain geographical advantages in terms of its location, North Korea's political and economic conditions present important challenges for biodiversity, and this has consequences for North Korea's people. A major issue is the degradation of North Korea's forests, which may be logged to generate a tradable economic resource or to create agricultural land, but which, if left standing, provide important ecosystem services and habitat for North Korea's human and animal populations. For example, North Korea is routinely classified as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, and it's particularly prone to flooding because of its topography. And this is something that's likely to be made worse by deforestation on high elevation slopes. And continuing shortages of food, medicine, and basic goods for ordinary citizens underpin the exploitation of wild animals for consumptive use and domestic wildlife trade. This fits with broader patterns that we see around the world, and that's by both the state and by residents. However, it's important to note that since the 1990s, there has been this shift where animal products have been increasingly funneled towards cross-border trade with buyers in China. And unsustainable and illegal wildlife trade does have consequences that extend far beyond the borders of North Korea. For example, the persistent threats to key mammals in North Korea does present a risk to China's conservation aspirations in their shared border zone. And furthermore, cross-border wildlife trade from North Korea to China may undermine China's CITES commitments. So taken together, these trends undermine North Korea's important natural resources and need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say a few words of thanks to the organizations listed here, and in particular to all of the North Korean participants in our work, without whom this really wouldn't have been possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Joshua, Dr. Powell, I mean, I think it's a very interesting biodiversity. And yeah, let's start with, your major point on this cross-border wildlife trade. And that actually is one of the main reasons, for North Korean people, probably not urbanite, but probably, rural residents, to capture, especially in the large, mammals. And then export those remains and parts to China. I think that it's happening from Southeast Asian countries, Myanmar and then Thailand and then partly Vietnam. But is there any particular pattern of North Korean export illegal or pseudo-legal cross-border wildlife trade to China? And then we found in South Korea there is a North Korean wildlife remains, for example, Gyeongdong market in Seoul, that means this wildlife trade, say route, it's reaching not just China, but also South Korea, probably some other part of the world, probably Japan and others. So what's your take on it? And then especially the peculiarity or uniqueness of North Korean wildlife trade politics or ecosystem.
Yeah, no, really interesting observations. And I mean, certainly in terms of South Korea, it's my particular specialism is in large carnivores, and particularly big cats. And it is something that we have noticed from previous work on big cat trade in South Korea, that we were picking up reported examples of tiger bone wine being sold in South Korea prior to 2009 that were labeled as coming from North Korea. Of course, it's impossible to tell whether that is actually authentic or not, because these are historical records. So there are two possible explanations there. One is that it really is tiger bone derived, and the other is that it's manufactured using a different species and then it's labeled as tiger derived. And we don't currently know which of the case is true, what was going on there. One of the major medical universities in North Korea has been mentioned as an origin source on products that have been picked up in China by Chinese officials before and relatively recently. So it's certainly an interesting subject and potentially very concerning. If it really was authentic, there's a couple of different sources as to where tiger bone might come from. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from wild animals. So a relatively major issue worldwide is the production of tiger-derived products, including tiger bone wine, from captive tigers. That's certainly an issue which is currently much in focus in the context of Southeast Asia. So that may well be the case if that is authentic, but it would still constitute a legal trade. So as I mentioned, China is a CITES party, and tiger is an Appendix 1 listed species and subject to a whole range of other restrictions on trade. And the reason for that is obviously that tiger is an endangered species, and trade is a major driver of the loss of tigers worldwide. Within North Korea itself, we definitely see patterns in trade. So relatively complex trade chains, perhaps surprisingly. So provinces along the border with China, particularly North Hamgyong and Yangon province, serving as kind of main gateways for cross-border wildlife trade. So a resident from a province further south might attempt, say if they captured a common raccoon dog or a badger, which are both animals, they could then be traded on to another resident and then enter trade through that route. And there are definitely patterns at different times of the year. So around Lunar New Year, which is a time when in China families come together and have large celebratory meals, often with many different types of meat on the table. That's a time which is particularly targeted for trying to sell deer, so venison, and also pheasant meat as well. And it was reported that North Korean hunters who managed to capture these species, if it was outside of that time period, they might just consume it themselves. But there was a particular push to try and sell these particular animal products, these types of wild meats, just in that run up to Lunar New Year.
I mean, it's pretty natural for us to assume that the population of wildlife, especially large mammals, including wild cats, decreasing, shrinking. I think it's in North Korea and South Korea and other countries actually try to prevent this type of disaster, natural disaster from happening, or say the recovering from this type of disastrous situation. They use the word endangered species, and then does North Korea have endangered species list you mentioned that there is a law, to prevent this type of exploitation, excessive exploitation of the wildlife in North Korea. But just like South Korea and China and the United States and UK, does it have this type of list of endangered species?
Yes, so there is a
What
list
are
of,
they then?
yeah, kind of domestically in what. So we consider species to be endangered either globally or domestically. And North Korea has, I think it's fair to say, relatively good infrastructure in terms of the institutions that are in place and the kind of designation of species and sites for protection. There is a relatively heavy focus in North Korean law on what are considered to be useful species. So species that might be economically valuable, essentially, for the state. But that's relatively similar to South Korean law. So there are elements of South Korean law that that is what protection for different species is based on. And part of the difficulty, as with anything that involves trying to understand the legal status of particular activities in North Korea, is that obviously the North Korean legal system is very complex. And in the case of individual species, they're sometimes subject to very specific, say, presidential decrees that specifically mention individual species. And that might be around like the way that a species could be harvested or should not be harvested. So, for example, there's a presidential decree that dates back to 1959 that specifically protects a couple of mustelids. So these are a member of the weasel and otter family. And so, for example, sable, the species that I mentioned, the fur bearer, is specifically protected from exploitation under that presidential decree.
Thank you for your very interesting the presentation. At the same time, this lively discussion, and then your very warm heart on the protection of wildlife, especially big cats.
Well, thank you very much. No, it's been
So
lovely to speak to you today.
All right, thank you. We invited Dr. César Ducruet, French National Center for the Scientific Research, and he is working also, for the Economy X and the University of Paris Nanterre in France too. He's a very well-renowned, expert on the port and then logistics and then, related, subject. And then we are very, very happy to have, Dr. César Ducruet. And then the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Peck. So I will present today some fresh results about the analysis of North Korean shipping and ports. And first, I can explain my interest for this topic. 20 years ago, I have been a postdoctoral researcher at CRIS, which is Kukto Yongguwon in Anyang in South Korea. And when I was doing this postdoc, I started to work on North Korean port cities with my colleagues. The context at that time was favorable because North Korea was launched some economic reforms. There was at that time a hope that North Korean ports could be the base of a new policy like in China to develop growth poles around the port cities. Then we got a funding from Korea Land Corporation to conduct a study on the matter. I had the chance also to have a friend, a long-term friend, a French person working in Pyongyang with his foreign consulting company, especially in the field of economic development and logistics. So I could learn a lot from him because he was traveling in North Korea freely with his car and his boss. They were collecting information and very frequently visiting Pyongyang. So, and the last motivation that I had was the discovery of a database from Lloyd's List in London, a database of vessel traffic, commercial vessel traffic in the world, including North Korean ports and North Korean vessels. So these are the main motivations for my involvement in this study. So it is already a long-term topic for me. So why North Korean ports? There are many factors to explain this interest on North Korean ports. First of all, as you can see in the maps, on the left map, you have the size of the cities, the urban system, and on the right, you have the size of the ports, the port system. And you can see that there is quite a strong overlap between the two hierarchies. So it means that main cities are coastal in this country. Another characteristic of North Korea is that there is a potential Russian and Japanese transit trade, notably through Rajin in the northeast. Again, another factor to give ports their importance is the decline of the inland transport system due to natural conditions and mountains and the lack of maintenance of the roads and railways, the lack of electricity also to run to use the railways. So all of this give ports an advantage over the other transport activities. And finally, the proximity to South Korea and China as transshipment hubs to connect the rest of the world. But of course, there are limiting factors for North Korean ports. The fact that they are managed by the army means that the commercial function of ports is relatively limited compared with issues of protection from the outside. There are serious technical limitations in terms of equipment, cargo handling equipment, and accessibility. Also, of course, we have no information on port activity in North Korea, so it is very difficult to understand how ports are being developed there. And something else is that currently, since quite some time, most of the external trade of North Korea happens by land through the Chinese border. So this is the situation now. So we collected several decades of data from the Lloyd's database, and this could help us to get some hint about what is going on in the country. So these are some graphics that we could elaborate. As you can see, the start of the analysis is in the late 70s. So it is a period of slowdown, economic slowdown in North Korea. The rest of the period is marked by a rapid decline of connectivity. So degree centrality is the number of maritime connections. So it went through a drastic decline and up to 2021. And the interaction range, it is the average kilometric length of the connections. Very few exceptions are visible in the evolution of the lines. For example, in the in the early 2000s, there is a small peak of activity which is related with humanitarian aid from Europe or the US. And in the middle of the 2010s, it is the influence of coal trade, coal exports. But as you know, the coal exports were the coal exports were forbidden in 2015 and 16 by the UN and the US to avoid that North Korea would use the profit of the coal trade to build weapons of massive destruction weapons. The last graphic here, as you can see, with a color for every country connected with North Korea. So in yellow, you can see Japan, which was dominant until the late 2000s, and then its importance disappeared. In blue, you can see the growth of South Korea until the middle of the 2010s, and China clearly took the lead in the last few years as the main connection, maritime connection of North Korea. So external hubs in Northeast Asia, it is more or less the same figure than the previous one, but at the port level. So we have a good overview with the data of how and which ports are connected, the most connected with North Korea by period of 10 years. So in the first period, from the late 70s to the late 80s, as you can see, and as was remarked by very rightly by Professor Peck, we have Niigata and Yokohama in Japan as the biggest connections, but also Hong Kong. And but the share of North Korean vessels is stronger in Niigata and also Dalian in China. Ulsan in South Korea also is quite important, but it is not connected with North Korean vessels. On the second period, you have a rise of traffic with Niigata and Dalian. So Niigata was famous for being the seat of a North Korean community, and it used to be a very strong connection, maritime connection, especially for ferry traffic, ferry boats between Wonsan in North Korea and Niigata. The third period, you can see that South Korea has very much increased its connectivity with the north. Incheon is now the biggest external connection of North Korea, followed by Ulsan, Busan. This is in a context of closer relationships between the North and the South, more collaboration, and so on. But of course, the share of North Korean vessels is much higher outside of South Korea. So in North China, Far East Russia, and still Japan, but in a much lower proportion. The last figure shows that it's now these days, in the recent years, it's Dalian in North China, which has become the main hub to connect North Korea to the rest of the world. Japan has nearly disappeared, and South Korea still keeps a very moderate. Dalian is followed by a number of coal ports, which have been doing coal exchange of coal with the North, because we have to notice that coal in North Korea is of the finest quality compared with other exporting countries. Here it is interesting to see that every fleet, national fleet, has played a specific role in connecting North Korea to the rest of the world. I can see that the Chinese fleet in the early period, mostly Japan with North Korea, but more and more China itself. So this is the case for most of the fleets. There is a trend of nationalization of flows, if we can say like this. And but the South Korean fleet, for example, is more and more connecting North Korea with the rest of the world, and so on. The same for Russia and so on. So the port system in evolution. So you can see that most of the traffics declined as in the first figure previously. There is a period of crisis since the fall of the USSR, except for Rajin with the free trade zone experiment, with a slight growth to build, to bring some goods, raw materials to build the free trade zone. Then there is a period of humanitarian aid in the late 90s and early 2000s. Especially for Nampo, there is the effect of North-South cooperation, so that Nampo did not decline as much as the eastern large ports. Chongjin, Hungnam, and Wonsan used to be almost as big as Nampo in terms of traffic, but it is now it has vanished since quite some time. And Nampo and Rajin, especially for the coal trade in the middle of the 2010s, they got revived thanks to the coal trade, but as you can see, since 2018, it is compromised. Another evidence about what is happening in the north, it is a very quick and regular aging of the fleet. So North Korean vessels are almost not anymore able to trade due to their age and technical deficiencies. You have to know that for the world fleet in general, the current average age of a ship in the world is about 17 or 18 years old. And so the North Korean fleet is on average reaching 30 years old. So it gives you an impression of the technical difficulties of the country. You can pass. So these evidences, so you have geographic shifts, shrinkage of the connectivity, technical issues happening in the north. So the main conclusion is that North Korea is less and less able to connect the world trade through its own fleet and own ports. So it is using more and more external hubs to connect, like Dalian in China in the most recent period. So the port activity has almost disappeared in recent years due to UN sanctions, of course the COVID, and the trade is occurring mostly by land, and the crisis is deepening. There is some illicit trade still in high seas, not at the ports. For example, the oil transfer between ships, like Chinese ships and North Korean ships. China has become the main maritime connection for North Korea with Dalian and other coal ports. We can say that the ongoing economic transformations that have been reported in recent literature are not visible so much through the maritime data. For example, the rise of private business, the development of markets in the country. We don't see yet their impact on the evolution of traffic, which is still very modest and very, very low. So we will see in the coming years and decades how ports can resume their activity and become maybe a key asset for North Korean development. Thank you.
Great. It's a lot of new information, for me as well as South Korean informed public interested in North Korea. Of course, I think it's across the world, and not just the Korean Peninsula, but also Europe and then the North America who are working on North Korea issues, and then will be very, very surprised by this detailed research. Lovely. Yeah. So
Thank
I yeah, I have a few questions, and let's start with Nampo, and let us get familiar with North Korea's port situation. It seems to me, and then you explained it very gracefully, and Nampo is still the most important port. Of course,
Yes.
Hamhung and the Wonsan, they were 50s, 60s, and 70s. They had a pretty large role, for the North Korean, the port trade and all, the fleet movement. But Nampo is still there. So Nampo seems to me is pretty similar to Incheon, for Seoul. Nampo is for the Pyongyang, the state capital, and my analogy is right, and then how can you describe this relationship between Nampo and then Pyongyang and then other parts of the North Korea?
Yes, you are right. Especially in the third period that in the maps where I showed that Incheon was the biggest connection for North Korea. At that time, Nampo also was the biggest port for North Korea. So, and I didn't show you the maps where we show the connections between North and South Korea. When we zoom and we map these connections, in the third period, you can see that Nampo and Incheon have the highest connection with each other. And it is interesting indeed because each of them is the gateway to the national capital. So this map was providing a kind of mirror image between the two countries. It was very interesting to see that. Unfortunately, it didn't last so long. In the fourth period, Nampo is more and more connected with China instead of Incheon. So this was a temporary situation. Except from this north-south connection, of course, Nampo is a place where you had important investments in terms of new port terminals from Chinese investments in the 2000s. Yes, two container terminals were developed, but we don't know so much about every port in detail. We don't have so much information about what is really going on in each port. So this is a big limitation, of course. We try with maritime data, we try to understand what is going on, but the data is still cannot replace the visit on site or the
So yeah, I mean, so then Nampo, Incheon, you say the traffic, maritime traffic between these two ports in South Korea and North Korea was pretty heavy, especially the time of golden period of bilateral or inter-Korea relationship under Kim Dae-jung government, probably Roh Moo-hyun government at that time was pretty big. And it seems to me, if this inter-Korea relationship, the two Korea's relation is getting better, improved, then probably we can expect the more maritime traffic between these two ports, right?
Oh, yes. Yes, right. So it used to be the case in the middle of the 2000s when after the first inter-Korean summit, also in a context of North Korean reforms, economic reforms. Also, it was the context of the Kaesong industrial complex. So all of this was giving at that time a very bright future for north and south connectivity on the seaside. But from 2007 to 2008, it started to decline, as you know.
Right.
There was in the figure we can see that there was a revival of connectivity with coal trade, but coal trade, but it was a short-term revival. So let's see in the coming future how things can evolve.
Sure. Good.
Yeah.
So and then, but Nampo is still there, but your primary argument is the east coast of in Korean Peninsula. They had a pretty heavy maritime traffic in the 60s and 70s, and then I just see Japanese archipelago, the western part of Japan, Niigata, the port. I think they are, I think, correlated with each other. Say, this Niigata is playing a very large role, for the North Korean maritime traffic. But at the same time, Hamhung and Wonsan is there, I think, but there the traffic is going down and almost disappeared. Then Niigata's role is shrinking. Is there any correlation behind this scene?
As we saw in one of the graphics, the traffic with Japan used to be in the 70s used to be the biggest. Japan used to have the biggest share of external connectivity for North Korea until the middle of the 2000s.
So Jochongyeon, North Korean Japanese in Japan, they are playing a large role in there.
Oh yes, this is one main reason. Also because of the trade between Japan and North Korea. So these two different reasons. Yes, there used to be a ferry link, direct ferry link between Wonsan, especially, and Niigata, until the North Korea launched in 2006 a missile. And this was famous in the news at that time, and this missile prompted Japan to stop any relationship with North Korea, and they forbid at that time they did not allow anymore North Korean vessels to enter Japanese ports.
Yes, in the western part, in West Coast and the East Coast, and then you say that there is a lack of data or to be more specific on this the dynamics. If you are the North Korean leader in charge of this port logistics and port itself, and what's going to be the first the most important priority to improve this port in the West Coast and the East Coast. Yeah, we just assume a bit hypothetical, of course. The relationship among countries are getting better and on and on and on. But what's your first choice to improve?
Yes, this is a very good question. I think that ports are not sufficiently used, at least for domestic activities, like moving goods within the country. North Korea is, since the crisis of the 90s, North Korea is lacking of an internal transport system to move the people and goods among the different provinces. So this is, I think this is one of the first decision I would make to reactivate the ports on each coast to allow the coastal shipping and short sea shipping between the different provinces. So this is something that I would do. Maybe so. Would be my first policy, and maybe a second policy would be to, well, like the Korea Land Corporation was thinking about when I was a postdoc, starting to apply maybe the Chinese model on in North Korea, which means the development of free trade zones around the ports. It is something which has been mentioned in the earlier literature, is that North Korea has a very skilled labor force. People in North Korea are ready to work very hard. So this is an advantage for foreign investment in North Korea. And the ports are there. They need a little bit of course, to be renovated a little bit. But everything is there. There are all the criteria to build free trade zones like in China, in North Korea.
Okay.
So this would be my second policy.
Okay, great. I think it's you're on the right direction. Modernizing in the port and improving this domestic use of a port between provinces. At the same
Also,
time, yeah, in the special economic zone or free trade zone, in the those ports, as you just explained, in China has done very well last 4 decades or so. So I think this is good. Okay. Okay, today we invited a very interesting researcher, Dr. Maria Osetrova from Russia. She's working for the Center for Korean Studies of Institute of China and Contemporary Asia in Moscow. And she is a very renowned scholar for the North Korean food culture and then dining service at the same time, gastronomy, and its the sociological and the anthropological implication. Let's get started. Floor is all yours.
Hello, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be your guest, and thank you for the interest in my topic. So, just a couple of words about how I got involved in this research. In 2016, I defended my PhD thesis at Yonsei University with the paper titled Gastronationalism in Contemporary Korea. And one chapter, though it was fully devoted to K-food concept and like how Koreans express their national feeling through their national food, one chapter dealt with North Korea, because I was trying to compare the differences and similarities between how North Koreans present their food and how South Koreans present their food. So what is common, what is different? And that was the start of my interest in North Korean food. But the more I researched, the more interesting I found it. So today I will tell you a little bit about the current state of North Korean food culture and dining service. My main points to cover today will be First, the growth of the number and types of eating out establishments. And by this, I mean not only restaurants, but any places like little street stalls, like canteens, so any place where you can eat out. There are lots of them now in Pyongyang and other big cities of North Korea. Second thing, the change in the attitude towards eating out concept per se. And this change brought the other change in the official representation in North Korean media. I will explain a little bit later in detail about it. Next thing is national cuisine, which is called choseonreori in the DPRK. You know, like in South Korea, you call it hansi, but in North Korea, they call it choseonreori. And now, like probably since the 2010s, it has been perceived and presented as an effective tool of the DPRK's international image construction, but mostly in form of North Korean delicacies. So the North Korean representation of Korean food. Also, I would like to talk a little bit about changes in the sector of public eating establishments that brought not only the economic growth, but also started to transform the lifestyles of urban residents, which means that they start to see the eating out practice as something different from what it used to be before. Eating out is now perceived not as a state bonus or a collective feast organized for people who work together, but more likely as an individual lazy experience available for money. This is quite important. Important thing to also to touch is inclusion of the North Korean cuisine related items in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List. These are kimchi tradition and Pyongyang. And of course, the role of national cuisine in the development of the touristic industry, which is like booming now these days in North Korea. If we have time, we also can touch into Korean controversy over the authenticity of national food. So these are the main topics I suggest we can discuss today. I think that during the Kim Il-sung times, attitude toward restaurants and the concept of eating out was different from what we have today. Back then, the state official sources and even art, as you can see, did not introduce restaurants as a proper form of recreation for workers. As in any socialist country, the focus was more on sufficient food production rather than consumption. So here you can see that, you know, all the pictures are showing us like how much food they have, but they never eat it. They only like look at it, like marvel at it, but never eat. You see, for example, this picture, I love it. Like this is a top. No one touches the food. So we see that there are a lot of food, a lot of rice, a lot of fruits, but nobody eats. Another example here, you can see this is the partisan, the guerrilla food. But everyone is just sitting and talking. But there was such an attitude in public understanding. This doesn't mean that people in socialist countries did not go out to eat. They ate out too, but the eating establishments where they did so were organized around socialist principles that were inevitably reflected in their management and service styles, their interiors, and even their menus. In the early years, all guests were supposed to have admission tickets. I'm talking about the Onlyone restaurant. So first of all, you can see that this is really massive eating out. So lots of people eat together. And second, if you want to get to Onlyone, you just don't pay money, you don't pay money, make reservation, but you have to get the tickets to go there. And where you get it at the company or maybe factory where you work for. So both these characteristics show the original socialist nature of these public eating establishments where people ate together in large groups. Therefore, the eating experience was collective rather than individual. And commercial interests were not the first priority from the restaurant management perspective. The focus was not on offering individual recreation or gastronomic pleasure, but rather on providing a collective experience of bonding of co-workers. So this is very important. This is not like this much anymore. This is changing right now. So if you look at other this is more recent examples of North Korean eating out practices. And you can see this is not about this mass collective eating out practices, but it's more about individual pleasure, gastronomic enjoyment. So, and this is how it's promoted in the media as well. So it's okay to go out to pay money and have your own pleasure, individual pleasure, where you enjoy the company, you enjoy the talk, you enjoy the foods. This is very important. And let me give you another example. You know, when I was in Pyongyang in 2017, I visited Chancheolgu Pyongyang Commercial University, and there was a room about the history of the university. And the first thing I saw when I entered that hall was the huge portrait of Kim Jong-un drinking espresso. So this image was totally new because I think that was kind of a symbol of this term. When it's okay to enjoy little gastronomic pleasures, it's not illegal anymore. So that's why we can. This is a proof of this tendency. So this is simple examples of street food, which I also took myself in 2017. I think it's still same or maybe a little bit more elaborate these days. What I can see on when I look at the recent materials in internet. New features, what we can see these days. First of all, modern design of the restaurant. One of the most popular, I'm sure you've seen it already, the Sedongan Chip, which looks very modern, very fresh, and looks quite, I would say, you know, this is another example of this tendency when we say that we can go out together and have fun and have gastronomic pleasures, like have a little beer, enjoy the company. So this is also another very vivid feature of it. Also, the thing I noticed these days that you can see robots that serving guests in North Korean restaurants, which is also the sign of technology, that they follow all these technological fashions as well. Contemporary gastronomic friendly menus. So this is not only North Korean food, but you can find things like croissant on menu. Or I was surprised to find pavlova desserts in one of Korean menus these days. So pavlova dessert is a kind of named after Russian ballerina, but was invented in Australia and New Zealand in the 30s. So it became so fashionable around the world, maybe last like 15 years. And the fact that North Korea also incorporated this feature in their menus and they sell it, show that they do not only stick to the traditional menu, but also can take new features from around other gastronomic international fashions. We can also see new packaging and new food design. So it's not only this old-fashioned, you know, plates and decorations, but also like very modern fashions of food presenting. Also at the photos below, you can see the male chefs, and also the feature of something new that is going on around the world in the gastronomic world. So all this another feature of another photo of North Korean restaurant, where you can see that they are choosing from variety of foods. So happy, relaxed, enjoying their gastronomic pleasures. Also, changing in the attitude towards the national cuisine as a country promotion tool. So, 2 food-related items was included in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List. Kimchi making tradition in 2015. 1 year later, South Korean kimchi entered the same list. And the next one was in 2022. It was Pyongyang, and you can see that this dish is exclusively North Korean gastronomic symbol. And this was very important to include it to show the North Korean character, the North Korean face of Korean cuisine. Because of course you can find this dish in the South as well, but it doesn't have this symbolic status as it has at the North. That's why it was very important to include it in this list. So I think this is very important if we think about touristic industry, because many tourists. Now it's mainly Russians, but we expect countries to visit Korea in the near future. Of course, they come to try Korean food. This very strong motivation to go traveling. And of course, North Korea wants to have this attraction as well. So insam, the ginseng, 평양냉면, and other like fish, seafood and fish that is famous in North Korea. They're trying to make them a symbol of their cuisine. So a little concluding remarks. So we can see considerable positive change, both quantitative and qualitative, in the North Korean dining culture over the last 30 years. So more restaurants, different types of restaurants, different menu, new items, and the attitude. The attitude is different. That's the most important feature. Also, if we talk about, there is also a very well spread feature these days in gastronomic fashions, like nostalgia food. When we want to eat like in the childhood, when we want to eat like our parents did. So in North Korea, we also can see this feature, but it takes the image of so-called guerrilla cuisine. This is like the term I have coined, and I'm trying to show more and more about it. Like the food, which was very simple in the past, or maybe even during the Konane Hengun. So they are not, afraid to talk about it. The Koreans are not embarrassed to talk about it, but they try to present this food as the food of their hard times, but still in a very nostalgic tone. So the main message we get from the North now really is much better. We are not a hungry country anymore. They combat this image of a hungry country, and they show that they eat well, they eat like everybody in the world, they enjoy gastronomic pleasures, and they invite people to share the table with them. Yeah, let me stop here. I'm ready for your questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, interesting. Gastronomy of North Korea, and then from the diplomatic point of view, and then in sociological and anthropological point of view, that's very, very interesting. In the kimchi making, I said that's a documentary, right? Documentary film, and kimchi making in 2015, and then 평양냉면 in 2022. I remember in a South Korean broadcasting company also created a few documentary on North Korean food when this bilateral in inter-Korean relationship was okay in 2000s and then something like that. And then of course in the South Korean and other parts of the world are very interested in what kind of food North Korean people eat. And that actually stimulate our curiosity on the North Korea too. So it's eating out culture. It's important, and it's become more official. It's more open, and everybody doesn't need to worry about being, say, punished or purged, for the eating out and then enjoying some real gastronomy. I don't know we can call it gastronomy or not yet, but I think this is gastronomy. So, but then interesting thing is we understand the North Korean the situation, and especially in economic situation, is not that good, and that this gastronomy or gastro nationalism you used for the South Korea, and I think it's North Korea too. Probably upper class, right? In the Pyongyang, and probably a little bit of wonsan, and then a little bit, yeah. I mean, so that's our curiosity. I'm not, arguing they are propagandering with this, food, but what kind of people can eating out? It's important, and that's my first question. And then eating out means they are not just eating the 평양냉면 all the time, right? There are many types of the North Korean cuisines. So can you introduce some cuisines, other food rather than 평양냉면? And that's my second question. And then we will move on to some other issues too.
So Of course, there's no way for us to make any field research and understand very in detail who is going to these restaurants. But what we can say now, of course, these are people with money, people who are living in big cities. First of all, Pyongyang, of course. So these people can go to restaurants, but I think that if we talk not only about this high-end restaurants, which they have now these days in Korea quite a lot, but also there is a culture of these little places where people can eat out too, like little canteens, cafes, even a street stall. And the more this culture is developing, the more people can afford it. So I think this is important feature. So of course the restaurants, only the elites and people who are around them can afford going to the restaurants. People who live in this new district of Pyongyang, people who are related to very well developed industries, so they have money and then can go there. The poorer you are, the less opportunities you have, but still important thing that even people with less money can afford eating out these days, but in a less prestigious places. So this is the answer to the first question. And the second question, other items. There are many things. I have a paper on North Korean culinary books. And I was studying, like, actually, I have a slide with my papers. I will send it later so you can have a list of the things I wrote.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but important thing that if we look at North Korean and South Korean variations of Korean food, they're quite similar, but the attitude is different. My surprise was that North Korean cuisine also, of course, has bibimbap, but no one thinks it's something special. And in the South, as you know, of course, this is like also symbolic food, which have this 5 elements of oheng, and this is like a philosophy.
Oh, that's a propaganda.
That's my point. There are propaganda on both sides, but it's just different, and it's interesting to compare them. So South Korean sources are telling us about this echo, meaning that this philosophy, tradition, mother's taste. And on North Korea, we have totally different narrators. But they have the same food. So most of it, you can find bibimbap, you can have all this kind of panchan, which is a little bit different, of course, but still the same thing. Of course, you have the structure when you have a soup, rice, and lots of panchan. The feature of North Korean diets, if we call it this way, is probably lots of oksusu, right? Kanmeni, as they call it. So corn dishes, they have a lot. Also potato dishes, but I wouldn't say that it's like all the thing they eat. Yeah, it's just a little feature that they have. Yeah, I will stop here.
Thank you for your excellent, the lecture. At the same time, very lively discussion. It was a really productive and insightful, and then fun. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.